SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, hello and welcome to this last week of plastic waste management course. So, this is the week 8 and as you know from the course outline, in this particular week we will be focusing on plastic resource recovery and the concept of circular economy and how that relates to plastics. So, as you know, resource recovery means trying to recover the resource from plastic waste and how it fits into the big picture circular economy, which is a new buzzword. Circular economy, life cycle analysis, these are kind of newer words which is there in our environmental domain as of today. So, again the concept that will be covered is plastic resource recovery, plastics and circular economy. So, that is what we will be focusing on this week, and so this would be, as you know, this is the last week. Again, like any other week, we will have 5 videos of half an hour each, and there will be a quiz, and of course you have discussion forum for all the questions and answers and any queries. So, okay, so let us get started. So, when we say circular economy, resource recovery or of a plastic product, we are talking about essentially life cycle of that plastic product. Now, what is life cycle? As this particular picture is trying to illustrate, life cycle means you start from the very beginning, life cycle. So, you start, the concept is cradle to grave or cradle to cradle, and I will explain you those concepts in a minute. Those of you who have taken a life cycle analysis course, like we had one offered through NPTEL as well, which was run twice. So, if you have taken that course, so you know that, but even if you have not taken that course, doesn't matter, we will be covering the basics in this particular video here as well. So, in terms of and those of you who have taken that course, it is kind of a revision for you. So, when we say life cycle analysis, we are talking about starting from very beginning. So, extraction of the raw material. So, you get the raw material acquisition, which is you trying to get the raw material from the mines, we get those raw material, then we have to produce. So, there is a production phase, we are making some production, we are making things. So, in terms of plastic products, raw materials will be essentially, plastic comes from oil based, isn't it? The traditional plastic is oil based. So, it is a crude petroleum. So, that is the raw material. From that we have several plastics, different types of plastics being formed, and that is what the formation of different types of plastics, and with those plastics we are fabricating different products. So, once you have the basic plastic like the plastic raw material, from there you are making a product. So, you are fabricating, you are making a lot of products. So, you have got a lot of end products coming out of plastic based, which can be essentially plastic and could be mixture of plastic with other materials. Then packaging, then it gets distributed through the wholesalers to the retailers, and then finally it comes to our human like in our houses, in our offices, and different application that we use it. Sometimes we reuse it within our system as well. So, there is a reuse, like you get a big bag, you went to a Pantaloon store or a big Bazaar and those kind of stores, and you get a bag which is a good quality bag, and you keep on using that bag for quite some time. When it gets bad, when it starts tearing away, you throw it. So, there is a lot of reuse happens, which is kind of that particular product. And once the reuse is done, we are not using it anymore, we put it in an end of life. So, we started from extraction from the very beginning, and then finally we went to the end of life. So, that is your cradle to grave. The whole concept of cradle to grave is, cradle is when the baby is born, we put it in a cradle. So, that is the beginning of any particular product. and grave is end of life. So, at the end of the life, we put the dead bodies in a grave. Since this concept came from the Western world, they use grave for most of the cremation, and so that is why this is called cradle to grave. In recent times, so this is the like end of life, it goes to landfill or can go for energy recovery. So, that is your like end of life of a plastic product, or for that matter any product life cycle analysis. In recent times, a newer concept is being investigated quite extensively in recent past, where we are trying to like recover the material, we are trying to recycle the material, we are trying to bring it back into the different pallets, which we talked about in the earlier week, if you remember, when we are talking about the plastic recycling. So, we are trying to do the monomer processing, we are manufacturing those plastic resin. That's, I think that was in the last week, we talked at the beginning of the last week, we talked about that. So, and then when you do it and you bring it back into the production, so you have these kind of stuff which you bring it back into the production. So, for you take this and you bring it back to the production phase, that becomes your cradle to cradle. That essentially becomes your cradle to cradle. So, you had started from the very beginning, and then you are again making it back into the economy. So, that is the cradle of cradle concept, is that circular economy concept, which we'll talk about in more detail in this particular week. Circular economy, which you may be hearing a lot of buzzword these days. One of the problem that we have in environmental jargons is that we start using certain terminology, whether we understand that or not. These days you will see the circular economy used a very everything you will hear circular economy added to it. Similarly, earlier like last 5 to 10 years, sustainability was added to everything. Even today it is added to everything, although many times people, when they talk about sustainability, they essentially mean durability, something which lasts longer period of time. That is not sustainable, that is durable. Sustainable means sustainability has 3 pillars: economics, social and environmental. And the definition of sustainability is that you make use of resource in such a fashion that our future generation should have the access to similar resources for whatever they want to do with that. So, that is sustainable, where you do not use up all the resources, so the future generation does not have anything to work with. So, that is the concept of sustainability, with an angle of environmental performance, which is done by life cycle analysis, and also looking at social LCA and life cycle costing, which looks at economics part. Social LCA will look after the social part. So, there is a social angle, there is an environmental angle, and there is an economic angle, and then all these 3, that is why it is all 3 pillars of sustainability, that makes the concept of sustainability. But as you will see at many meetings, many conferences, even some talk shows and other stuff, people will use sustainability just because they want to use it, although they do not really understand what really sustainability is. So, that that happens not only in India, everywhere, that happens in many places in the world. So, so we need to understand, that's the reason why I wanted to have a week devoted to this whole concept of circular economy, we'll talk about linear economy, circular economy, how it relates to plastic, because these buzzwords you will see a lot, and you should have, someone who has taken a plastic waste management course should have understanding of that, and that is many people do not have it. So, those almost 9,600 students who are registered for this course, I really want them to have a clear understanding of what is the concept of life cycle, what is the concept of circular economy, how it relates to plastic waste and plastic recycling and all that. Okay, so let's go to. So, when we talk about this the waste management that we started with, in terms of any waste management practice, including for plastic waste, the concept is we try to go in this inverted triangle. That's the path we want to follow. Whether we are being able to follow or not, that is a different matter, but throughout the world, whenever you look at any waste management hierarchy, whether it is a municipal solid waste, whether it is construction and demolition waste, whether it is a plastic waste is essentially a subset of municipal solid waste, because at most of the places some will come from industrial and other sources, that is also we call IC and I waste, which is industrial, commercial and institutional waste. That is another term used in many parts of the world. But in general, when we talk about plastic that we kind of discussing in this course, or in general what you see in media and other discussion, the plastic waste that we are referring to is essentially coming from municipal solid waste. So, the hierarchy for in general for waste management is you start with source reduction, you try to reduce the waste that is being produced. So, that is the source reduction. If you cannot do that, whatever is produced, let us try to reuse it. If you cannot reuse it, let us try to recycle, which we talked about in detail in the previous week, how to do the recycle, different types of recycle. Cannot be recycled, like at PET, HDPE, they are pretty good in recycling, but there are certain types of plastic which is not that easy to recycle. And when you go for recycling, they may actually end up doing more harm to the environment than when we say more harm, because the type of energy and water requirement to make it recyclable, if you do that life cycle assessment, you may see that actually it is not really doing much environmental good. In fact, you are probably ending up spending more, your environmental footprint of recycling process is actually much higher than making the virgin plastic of that particular type. So then you go for incineration or some those kind of resource recovery part. So that is you go and try to do some sort of resource recovery. And then things which cannot be recovered, cannot be incinerated, finally landfilling, which is the least preferred way of like we want to have least preferred in terms of landfilling, and this is the most preferred in terms of the source reduction. So, this is what we try to achieve. Unfortunately, what is happening is kind of the opposite. As you know, most of the waste is ending up in Indian context is ending up in the dump site. Which is not a engineered landfill. In fact, from a technical point of view, we should not even call that a landfill. They are not landfill. The Dhapa, it is a dump site. Dhapa in Kolkata is a dump site. Devanar in Mumbai is a dump site. It is not a landfill. Okhla, Bhalaswa or Gazipur, those are dump sites in Delhi. They are not landfills. From a technical point of view, they are not landfill, although we call it landfill in the newspapers and other stuff, you see that being called a landfill, but landfill is actually an engineered structure which has a liner, which has leachate collection system, which will have a gas collection system, which will have groundwater monitoring system, a stormwater system. So, there are a lot of all the different aspects of civil engineering actually goes into making a engineered landfill. It is a geo-environmental, a lot of hydraulics is involved. So, geotechnical engineering, environmental engineering, even foundation engineering, everything kind of goes into the design, operation and maintenance of a landfill. So, what we have is in most of the places is essentially it is a dump site where the waste are ending up, and most of our waste are actually ending up in the dump site, but although it is the least favored landfilling, but that is where the most of the waste is ending up, and that is happening in other countries as well, not only in India, even in US close to 50 to 55 to 60% of the waste in US is also going to the landfill. So, in India it is more than 90%, but in the US also around 55 to 60% is going to landfill. Some European countries, especially Western European countries like Denmark, Netherlands, Austria, Germany, Sweden, Luxembourg and other places, they have actually reduced their landfilling to in single digit percentages, so less than 10%. But most of the other countries are still have to put a sizable, but those are landfills, those are engineered landfills. In India, we still have engineering, still have the dump sites, which is kind of a concern. So, but this is how in typically waste, and since the plastic waste is part of the waste, part of the municipal solid waste, in plastic waste also we see a similar hierarchy. We see more and more of plastic going to the landfill, as other than the ones which is easily recyclables, which PET, HDPE, they do get recycled, but many of the other type of plastic do end up in the landfill site, or can go to incineration plant as well. Only thing is that when you have plastic in the incineration plant, you have to be careful in terms of the temperature of the operation of the plant to make sure you don't produce dioxin, furans, and those kind of contaminants. So, being said that, let's move on. So, just wanted to kind of give you an idea of how the waste is managed in general. So, that was in general. Now, if you look at the plastic waste in particular, so if you want to try to recycle plastic waste and try to create the plastic waste recycling value chain. So, you start with consumer, which is you have the waste producer, like people like you and me, and some institution, factories and other places where the waste is essentially produced. So, it is the consumer or the waste producer, that is from where we start with. Then there is waste handling, you handle the waste. Sorting, you have a sorting for different types of plastic, you took at a recycler's place, and then in between you have when you go for consumer, which is lost to other waste stream in the environment. So, if you will lose part of it, it will not all be get collected, there will be some loss to export or incineration. Then when you do for sorting, rejects not fit for recycling, even for in sorting you will find several things which is kind of reject. And from recycling, once you kind of produce the new product, then you have you can replace the input of virgin plastic with the newer plastic that you produce, that kind of goes again to the producer phase. Then we have plastic consuming company. In between here, when you are producing the waste, you have when you are either using the virgin plastic, or if you are using recycled plastic, you make the product, there will be some production waste. So, all those things comes in picture in terms of the plastic waste recycling value chain, different aspects of that plastic waste which we see in terms of how it moves in an economy. So, if you look at kind of in a cyclic way of how things are moving. So, you start, there is in a broad picture we can call the things at upstream and downstream. Now, we will talk about that, what is upstream, what is downstream. So, upstream is, say you have your material, components and products. So, you have certain material, components and products, you design stuff. When you design, you try to get acquire material and components, you use certain engineering methods and tools, you do some quality control, and then you come up with a product, and that product is distributed, it is used, and then finally, once it distributed. So, this part of it, well, like you are making the product, you are getting it ready for the market, that is your upstream part. Then you come to the distribution, you put it in use and reuse, then you have end of use, you try to recover the material. Here also you will have some quality control, you may have some redistribution of the material going back into the economy, and some which cannot go comes to end of life management. In the end of life management, there could be offset aspect of remanufacturing or recycling or energy recovery or disposal. So, this part here is our kind of what is downstream part. So, upstream part is kind of acquiring material, using the design, come up with a new product. So, that is your upstream. Once the product is in use, end of life, and then things associated with end of life, that becomes our downstream. So, that is how these are again kinds of some nomenclature which is defined for different types of processes that happens in a plastic economy or in general for any economy in terms of when we look at its life cycle part. So, whenever we go for any of these design, there are it's not an easy process, it's a complex process, and whenever we try to go for anything like a sustainable or green and other stuff, as I was telling you earlier, there are different aspects associated with that. One aspect is, of course, say as part of sustainability, we were talking about the environmental issues, we were talking about the economic issues, we were talking about social issues, and then we are also looking at the technical issues, which will be more in terms of whether it can really be done, the operational challenges of doing different stuff. So, in terms of these four broad area, and what you need to do, as you can see in this picture over here, we have economic and social, we have environmental and technical, things overlap, and finally, there is an area where we have all four kind of has the presence, social, economic, environmental, technical, all have that presence, and but we need to have an optimization of coming up with an optimized stuff, something very good for the environment, but very difficult to operate, very costly, will not be acceptable to society of that particular, because of their own beliefs, and then the way they live their life, then that particular product or that particular process has no meaning. They may be great process or great product, but cannot really be accepted. So, then we have to look at all these four parameters, and based on that parameters we can come up with some like it's a complex optimization problem of the resource recovery. So, individually what they really mean, so there are as you can see on the sites, there are certain parameters listed. So, let us look at that parameters to make some sense out of that. So, for environmental, as we just talked about in a couple of slides ago, life cycle assessment, environmental impact assessment, those are the two broader area of looking at the environmental stuff. EIA, which is the environmental impact assessment, which probably many universities offer courses on EIA. EIA is mandatory for most of the projects to be done in India or in abroad as well. So, EIA has a localized kind of focus. So, say for example, I am sitting at a town of Kharagpur in West Bengal. So, say there is a proposal to set up a new factory a few kilometers from our campus. Now, we will do an EIA to find out what the changes, what is the impact that is going to come with the settlement, with the construction and of operation of this particular factory which is going to come here. So, we will look at the baseline, we will look at what could potentially happen, we will do some baseline calculation, we will collect some sample based on the type of factory which is going to come, what kind of pollutants will come out, how much energy will be required, how much water will be required. So, based on that we come up with our EIA, environmental impact assessment. LCA, which is kind of a bigger brother of EIA, it goes much broader. EIA is a localized thing, it is a localized focus study. LCA is a global aspect, where you are looking at in a global perspective. So, you go from very like a cradle to grave and have a global perspective. So, because things do move around, so you are using certain material at say at this particular place which was made in China or made in Germany or made in Japan, and so it had, while the manufacturing of that particular material, there was certain environmental footprint associated with that, and which is not taken into consideration when we are just using them and do that EIA study for this particular factory in say Kharagpur area. But if we are going for an LCA study, we will have to take that into incorporation, because LCA kind of talks about resource acquisition, material acquisition from the very beginning and all the way to the disposal. So, that is your LCA is a much broader concept, much bigger concept, global focus. EIA is more as a local focus. So, that is what the difference between, but both looks at the environmental aspect. So, that is EIA and LCA. Then in terms of when we talk about the greener stuff, which is kind of is smaller like oval shape over there. We'll get there in a minute. Let's look at the bigger picture of others, then we'll go into those oval shapes which is in the middle. So, economic, when we talk about economic, so we talked about environmental already. So, economic, we try to do that using cost benefit analysis. By doing the cost benefit analysis, input output analysis, or life cycle costing. So, that is how we look at the economic analysis. So, we can do a cost benefit, which is CBA, input output analysis, or life cycle costing. That is economic focus. Technical aspect, where we look at what is how in terms of the technical performance. So, there are some parameters of technical performance measures, manufacturing engineering matrix, green chemistry matrix. So, that can be used for the technical aspect. Finally, for the social aspect, there is a social life cycle assessment. So, which has been developed by UNEP, which very recently, like few years back, it came in, and we are still learning how to do social LCA, which is a little bit different than I'd say the concept is a bit different, and we have to really learn and start using it. So that's the bigger picture of the four bigger area. Now, in terms of the overlap areas. So, when we look at these small ovals in the middle, that two of them. So, here in terms of the point, we are looking at eco design and green design, which kind of works with environmental and technical both aspect. When we look at environmental as well as economic, we are looking at eco efficiency analysis, environmentally extended IOA, which is input output analysis. So, that is your so that's your that's environmental and economics. In terms of environmental and social aspect, we have certain sustainability assessment methodologies, life cycle sustainability analysis. So, that gives us social and environmental, and then technical, we talked about that. So, in general, so these all kind of leads to a complex value optimization problem for the resource recovery. So, that is how things needs to be put into perspective. So, whenever we go for a kind of a resource recovery project from an environmental point of view, we have to look at these factors. We have to look at the environmental issues, we have to look at the social, economics, and technical operational issues, whether it is going to work and how it is going to work. So, okay. So, let us go further. So, now the economic strategies for the recovery of recycling of plastic waste is low energy requirement during input production. If it is a low energy requirement, high demands for material in manufacturing, the cost of alternative acceptable form of disposal compared to recycling, we have to look at that. The price of virgin polymer compared to recycled polymer. So, sometimes you need to play with the rules and regulations and like bylaws and economics to make sure that things work for our whatever we want to get it done. It's kind of trying to influence the market in such a way, so that by making legislation in such a way, so that recycling and resource recovery is encouraged in terms of the plastic waste. So, in terms of environmental strategies for recovering and recycling of plastic solid waste, so what can be done? Enforcement of producer responsibility regulation to encourage collection of plastic waste. So, put a producer responsibility regulation. So, producer is responsible or liable for the waste that they produce. Now, we have to make sure that waste there is an infrastructure for waste management, but the producer has to do it. There could be monetary charges on that as well. Enforcement of national wide law on plastic waste recycling, because state wise it becoming difficult. There are borders around, so things can move across the border. To avoid that, we should have same rule throughout the country. Legalization of selective collection performed by waste pickers from household, retailers, and dump sites. So, because they are already collecting it, so why don't we just legalize it? Enforcement of environmental awareness program on the importance of plastic waste recycling, enforcement of waste segregation at household level, creation of quality standards and certification scheme for plastic recycler, and I think that's very, very important, and that's where institutions like us can play a role in terms of creation of standard, quality standard, and technically strong short term programs where we can train the manpower working in this particular area. So, and then there are market strategy, look at the market, formation of polymer recycling, closer engagement of recycling with supply chain, directly with municipalities, existence of market systems. So, those technical cooperation on waste plastic recycling. So, all these things needs to be looked into. There is a social strategy as well, like how to motivate people to do the plastic recycling at household level, source segregation at household level, efficiency of municipality private waste contractor in waste collection, introduction of plastic waste segregation at household level, increasing consumer awareness, education of the household community on the relevance of informal waste collector in the supply chain. So, all those things needs to be tried into our system. For the technical strategies, you look at the improvement in recycling technologies, improvement in size reduction, improvement in sorting, designing for product for recyclability, ensuring material applicability in manufacturing process, or recycled materials should come there. So, based on all these different aspects, we will continue our discussion of this plastic waste resource recovery. And so, we will close this video right now, and we will continue this and similar discussion in coming videos, and then we will get into the circular economy concept. So, again this is the last week number 8. So, we are almost there. The course, this is the week 8 video 1. So, we will have another 4 videos and the course will be over. So, I hope you are enjoying the course. And many of you, I see that many of you have registered for the exam. If this date is still there, please do that and take advantage of the exam so that you can get a course completion certificate. So, thank you, and I will see you again in the next video.